What's going on, everyone? It's Dungeon coming back with another Tactics Ogre Reborn hints and highlights video. And in this one, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my top 5 favorite early game classes. So if you've got a severe case of analysis paralysis when you're trying to pick out what class each character should be, you've come to the right place. Let's get right on into it. Alright, so I do have a couple things that I gotta mention before we get to the list. The first thing I gotta say is that the list is in order from the 5th one being an okay class to the first one being my absolute most favorite. Second, while this information is useful for an entire playthrough, I'll mostly be talking about the early game in Chapter 1, and we're really not talking about any of the main characters like Denim or Kashua. Lastly, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe. It really helps me defeat the YouTube algorithm. Now with that out of the way, let's get on the list. So for number 5, I've got for you guys the Archer. And the Archer is a ranged attacker. It has basically bows, crossbows, and daggers. And while you do have daggers, more than likely you're going to be just two-handing bows or crossbows, and you'll be a dedicated ranged attacker. And the main reason why you'd want to pick this is, for Chapter 1 that is for tremendous shot and maybe back attack, so that you can do, you'll do more damage when you use tremendous shot. Later in the game, you can upgrade your bows and crossbows, and they'll usually do status effects, especially with other abilities that you'll get later on. But at this point, that's pretty much all you're going to be looking forward to. It's just a ranged attacker. And I would say, like I said, Chapter 1, it's good. I mean, you get pretty decent armor selections that you can use in Chapter 1 and later on in the game. They're pretty decent or whatever. Nothing to really write home about, in my opinion. So, that being said, the stat growth, which I'll go ahead and put a stat growth chart at the end of the video. But the stat growth isn't really anything great either. It does focus highly on dex. So, you could definitely focus on having a high dex for the character. For my number 4 pick, I chose the Cleric. And while the Cleric doesn't have a wide selection of weapons, you do get some hammers and you do get cudgels. As far as other abilities that you get for the Cleric are Sanctuary, which prevents undead from entering tiles near you. And you do get a couple of recruiting abilities, such as Recruit Human and Recruit Divine. But the main ability that you're going to be wanting early on is going to be the Mediate ability, and that's because it'll restore a small amount of MP, and if you're lucky, you can maybe get this to proc like every turn or maybe every other turn or something like that, and that definitely will help you out because the spells you're casting are healing spells. And while your healing spells don't have very good scaling with your cudgels or pretty much any scaling at all, you do get single target healing, and later on in the game it does widen up into larger area of effects or higher boost of healing. You also get Exorcism, which basically permanently kills undead that you've already knocked down, and you'll get Awaken, which will remove sleep and charm effects on targets. Armor, on the other hand, is not very good for the Cleric, but because you're going to be behind the front line, it's usually not that big of a deal. Running, rather movement or jumping speeds and heights are pretty low, pretty limited. And as far as stat growth goes, you'll get bumps to MP, Mind, and Resistance. My number 3 pick is the Wizard, and the Wizard again does not have a very good selection on weapons, but you do get daggers in addition to the hammers and cudgels that you have. Also, this time the cudgels will actually scale with your attack spells, so that is a very good bonus as far as that goes. Abilities that the Wizard has is a very unique recruiting ability, which will basically allow you to recruit reptiles. And the two main abilities early game that you'll be looking forward to is the Mediate ability, which again will restore a small amount of MP whenever it procs. And the other one is Concentration, which will give you a large boost in the percent chance that you'll actually connect with your spells, specifically your status affecting spells. So basically, with regard to your spells, you'll get pretty much all the missile spells, you'll get all the indirect spells, area spells, and stuff like that. You do not get any of the instill attack spells, but you do get status affecting spells like Sleep, Poison, Stun, Charm, and they're all really good, especially early game. They're very, very good. They're very fun to use, actually. So that is definitely something to look forward to. But as far as armor goes, the armor is not very good. It's pretty lackluster. And again, you'll probably be in the back line with this type of character. So you could look forward to that. Movement speed and jump heights are pretty restrictive. And as far as stat growth goes, you'll get a bonus to MP, intelligence, and resistance. For the number 2 pick, I chose the Knight, and I really like the Knight. It is a really good selection of weapons, as you get one-handed swords, axes, hammers, and you get to use crossbows, which can actually be kind of nice and could come in handy depending on the type of character or build that you want. And what's more is that as far as ability goes, you can get pincer attacks, which will do extra damage for back attacks and stuff like that. It's like a free kind of attack thing. And the best thing about it early game is you get Rampart, which will restrict movements of enemies that are trying to go past you or around you. And just like Clerics, you get Sanctuary, you get Recruit Human skill, and another super good ability is the Phalanx ability, which will reduce hit points taken when you take damage. It's about 60%. So to top everything off, you can still use healing spells. You don't get a large selection down the road. You pretty much get basic healing spells and stuff. But early game, it's the same one everyone else can get. As far as armor goes, you get pretty much the best armors available, and that lasts throughout the whole game. And you, as a knight, you do have decent movement speeds, decent jump heights, and as far as stat growth bonuses, you'll get bumps in hit points, vitality, and resistance. And basically, all in all, I'd like to say that this is going to be one of your guaranteed early game frontline fighters, and use them, don't abuse them. So basically, I have 3 honorable mentions, and the first one is the Beast Tamer. While the Beast Tamer has a good selection of weapons, its main abilities basically focus on buffing and recruiting beasts and dragons and stuff like that. And for Chapter 1, it's not really a good use of their own wheelhouse, so I felt like it's kind of a waste. And the other thing is, lobbing also for Chapter 1 isn't the best idea, because you're usually strapped for cash, and you're not really going to want to be throwing a bunch of things around the battlefield. So that's pretty much the reason why I didn't include this one higher on the list. The Warrior is another honorable mention, and while it has one of the best weapon selections out of all the character classes in the game, it doesn't really have a whole lot else going for it. You do get Siege, which will allow you to walk through enemies that have the Rampart ability, and you also get Mighty Impact, which will pretty much do extra damage and will guarantee kind of like a critical hit or whatever. But aside from that, there's not a whole lot else going for it, and when you compare this class to other classes available at the early game, it just seems a little bit lackluster. The last honorable mention that I have is the Berserker, and while it has a good weapon selection, it has good stat growth, and it has powerful damage, it has a lot going for them. They have the Siege ability, and they also have this super cool Berserk ability that'll increase damage and will cause hits to do a really close burst AoE, which in the early game is super good and unique. The problem that I have with it is that the AoE that it does have doesn't distinguish between friend and foe, and it'll proc randomly, which for me causes a problem personally, because it doesn't actually invite synergistic battlefield tactics, and it seems to somewhat disrupt the flow of battle in the way that I like to strategize in these type of games. So just the class just doesn't really work for me. For my number 1 best early game class, I chose the Rune Fencer, as it pretty much has a good selection on weapons. It's actually one of the only classes that has the spears available to it in early game. Not only that, but you get hammers, one-handed swords, bows, and crossbows, all of which the selection is pretty unique for the type of class that it is. And in addition to other abilities, I would say it would be worth noting that you get the Recruit Human ability, and the mediate ability, which of course is the one that'll allow you to get extra MP whenever it procs, because this class can cast a variety of spells. You get healing spells, you get missile spells, you're one of the only classes that gets the instill spell. You unfortunately don't get indirect spells like AoEs, single target, elemental spells, status affecting spells, or whatever. But you do get a decent to good selection of armors. You get good movement and jump scores. And to top it all off, you pretty much get overall good stat growth in almost every stat. And especially you get good stat growth in MP and resistance. Personally, I think that it's one of the best classes early off because basically if you're trying to go for a character class change later on down the road that's going to involve the class using some measure of magic, because of the good stat growth that it gets, this class is going to basically give you a bit of a bonus. And pretty much overall, as it stands, the class has everything that you would want. I mean, you can heal, you can use range attacks, you can use melee attacks, you can use spells attacks, you get spears, you get the mediate ability. All in all, it's just a super good class, and whether you're using it for the short game or the long game, I mean, you can use this class for the entire game. You don't have to switch it at all, and it'd be a good, solid class. And that's pretty much why I picked this one as my number one. Alright, you guys, that concludes this episode of Tactics Ogre Reborn, hints and highlights, where I shared with you my top 5 favorite early game classes. So, if you had fun, if you learned something, if you enjoyed watching this, hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon so you don't miss another video, and as always, thanks, stay cool, and bye everyone.